President Biden unveiling the first round of new sanctions against Russia today as he faces pressure both in the U.S. and abroad to punish Moscow for what he described as the beginning of a Russian invasion. But as the president navigates a major foreign policy challenge, maybe the biggest during his presidency, he's also facing criticism as the nation watches how he handles the conflict, especially from some Republicans who say Biden's former policies emboldened Putin's actions.
I don't believe Vladimir Putin would have a couple of 100,000 troops on the border of Ukraine had we not precipitously withdrawn from Afghanistan last August. It looked not only chaotic, but it looked weak. And so they are pushing the limits everywhere in reaction to the perception of American weakness and loss of resolve.
But there is a divide in the Republican Party's view of the conflict. Today, for instance, the former president praised Vladimir Putin.
So Putin is now saying it's independent, a large section of Ukraine. I said, how smart is that? And he's going to go in and be a peacekeeper. That's the strongest peace force. We could use that on our southern border. That's the strongest peace force I've ever seen. There were more Army tanks than I've ever seen. They're going to keep peace all right. No, but think of it. Here's a guy who's very savvy. I know him very well, very, very well.
Joining us now, CNN political analyst and Washington correspondent for the New York Times, Maggie Haberman, and CNN chief political analyst, Gloria Borger. Gloria, I want to leave Trump aside just for a moment here and talk about what Mitch McConnell said. How much do you think the messy withdrawal from Afghanistan is shaping the administration's approach here?
Well, I think you'd have to say that even Biden partisans remember those terrible pictures and understand how badly that played out on their television screens when it came to the withdrawal in Afghanistan. I think McConnell is being really hyperbolic here, however, and I do think this is a completely different situation. In this situation, President Biden is trying to stop a war. He's not trying to end a chaotic, messy war of many, many years. He's trying to prevent one from happening. And what he's doing is trying to gather allies together on the same page, which is incredibly difficult, particularly coming after 4 years of a Trump administration when NATO couldn't agree on anything.
Maggie, we hear Mitch McConnell, and you've also heard people like Tom Cotton, Lindsey Graham, and others, Ben Sasse, who are critical of the Biden administration's response, saying it's not strong enough. But then you hear the former president praise Vladimir Putin. Mike Pompeo has praised Vladimir Putin in different words. And then Tucker Carlson, much the same thing. There really does seem to be a split now in the Republican Party. What are the implications of that?
John, I think that, to be clear, I do think that what the current president is doing is more important than the former president. But there absolutely, at least in this regard, there absolutely is a divide within the party about how to handle Putin, and you see it in the commentary that you just described. I think it's one thing to have a television host like Tucker Carlson saying what he's been saying, and then it's entirely something different to have the recent former president who is a all the polls show leading if he wants to be the Republican nominee again. So I put that in a different category, but it is striking that I think Republicans have, and this has been going on predating Trump, where there has been sort of an effort among some Republicans to suggest Putin is not that bad. And it's not as if there has been complete consistency among Democrats on this as well before the Trump era and before the hackings in 2016. But I do think that you have seen a number of people in the Republican Party either identify with sort of quote unquote perceived strength or suggest who cares about Ukraine. Then you have, as you said, the flip side. You have people like Tom Cotton who want to be more aggressive. And I think that that's where most Republican leaders are.
Gloria, that said, I want to show you something the House Republican Conference tweeted out today after President Biden's speech and Republican Adam Kinzinger's reaction to it. You can see the GOP House Conference tweeted a picture of Biden walking away from the podium with this quote, "This is what weakness on the world stage looks like," unquote. And Kinzinger responded, "As still technically a member of the House Republicans, let me with all my might condemn this damn awful tweet during this crisis. You can criticize policy, but this is insane and feeds into Putin's narrative. But hey, retweets. Am I right?"
Yes, he's right. He's 100% right. I mean, there is the President of the United States who is just talking about the fact that Ukraine is being invaded by Russia. And what do? The president has just spoken to the country, and he's walking off the stage. I mean, I'm old enough to remember when something like that would be considered a disgrace by any official arm of the Republican Party. But obviously, that's not the case anymore. There are people who believe, and I think obviously for political reasons right now, that there is no bar that is too low to criticize Biden on foreign policy, whether it's we ought to take a harder line or this isn't our problem, whatever it is, the official line will be, as you just saw in that photograph, that Biden is incompetent and can't do anything, and whatever he does will be wrong, even if it is against Vladimir Putin.
And then, Maggie, another thing you do hear from Republicans and allies of the former president is, well, Putin, didn't invade Donbass, didn't send troops into this region under Trump's watch. It's happening under Biden.
I think you're going to hear that a lot, John. I've certainly heard it a lot from sources in the last day. I expect it to be a continued line. I think it becomes a tougher case for them to argue when the former president is praising what Putin is doing. It's a little hard for it to be both that Putin was somehow fearful of Trump and worried about the quote-unquote madman theory and Trump's unpredictability, and then have Trump saying, wow, this is a good move. We should do the same thing on our southern border. But I think that the inherent logical consistency of these arguments don't really matter. I think basically it's going to cleave along the lines of Republicans saying Biden is wrong somehow and Trump is either right or a Republican would be better.
Joining us now is Tom Nichols. He is a contributing writer at The Atlantic. He's also the author of Our Worst Enemy, The Assault from Within on Modern Democracy, which is, I think, how you could label what we're seeing here, Tom. I don't want to waste a lot of time wondering why Trump is doing this, right? I mean, we would just waste time on that. I think the bigger issue here is that the Republican Party is pro-Kremlin. Maybe not all of them, but a lot of them. How is that affecting Putin's calculus?
Well, he sees a country divided. I think you're right that, spending a lot of time trying to figure out the inner workings of Donald Trump's mind is probably a waste of time. But there is a larger problem here, which is that the kind of bipartisanship that we once counted on during the Cold War and afterward just isn't there anymore. And that Putin has to notice that. I mean, he has an entire political party that tends to agree with Donald Trump, that thinks, he is a genius and that he's, pretty popular within that party. It's something he clearly has to take into account, and it works in his favor.
It was pretty telling that a spokesperson for Trump who posted part of that interview posted the criticism of Joe Biden, but didn't post what we just showed you in that interview where he's, dishing out compliments to Vladimir Putin. The point being the GOP could be critical of Biden without being pro-Putin, right?
Right. And, it's part of, I think it's a citizen's duty to hold the president accountable. But that's not what the GOP is about at this point. This is about, whatever Biden's in favor of, they're against it. And they will change positions back and forth depending on what the president's doing at any given moment. And this kind of weird fanboying for Vladimir Putin, who I think they see as kind of the leader of a white Christian Europe, which is a fantasy, really. It's a kind of a GOP wish casting, but it's not just criticism of Biden. It's coupled to this obvious admiration for a Russian dictator.